Let's welcome back our Bruiser Overlords for patch 10.5. Oh, and they're nerfing Ornn, thank God. Hey Summoners, and welcome back to another Pro Guides video. My name is Christoph, and today we're going to be going over some of the changes happening on Summoner's Rift in patch 10.5. While we've slowly been gathering bits and pieces here and there, we've been seeing a big list of changes recently. For the most part, we already have an idea of what's going to happen next patch, so we're going to be keeping you guys updated. Some follow-up buffs to junglers, Ornn nerfs, Sona buffs, item balancing, and various other changes are on the way to the live servers. And as always, for our question of the day, what are your thoughts on all these junglers hitting the Rift recently? Personally, I've felt like they've been pretty troll. You guys already know my opinion from the other videos, but a lot of them feel pretty weak, and I feel like they're not going to change the meta that much. Alright, and as always, if you guys want to get better at League of Legends this season, make sure to click the description link below and go to ProGuides.com, where a Challenger coach is ready to play with you right now. Alright guys, let's get into the video. Joining the ranks next patch are some new skins: Black Frost Rek'Sai, Black Frost Renekton, and Alistar, and lastly Hextech Sejuani are hitting the Rift. They look pretty cool, so I definitely suggest checking them out. I know I'm definitely going to get that Rek'Sai skin because it looks pretty damn good. Okay, now let's go into the balance changes. So first off, Ornn has been seeing a little bit too much success ever since the buffs to Bami's Cinder and Sunfire Cape. Anyone who has not been living under a rock has known that he's just got too much going for him, so Riot is looking to tone him down a bit. Thank God, honestly. First off, Ornn's passive will be receiving a nerf. While it used to deal 12 to 20.5% max HP as bonus damage, it now will deal 10 to 18%. Also, the Masterwork upgrades will now begin for Ornn at level 13 instead of level 12, while the upgrades for his teammates will now begin at level 14 instead of 13. While I would have hoped for more, this should actually slow him down, as well as his teammates scaling pretty significantly. Those minutes it takes to acquire those levels can be actually a huge difference, especially when fights over objectives are bound to take place at that time. Sett is next up on the chopping block to receive some nerfs next patch. His base armor is being reduced from 37 to 33, base HP regen from 8 to 7, HP regen per level from 0.75 to 0.5, and R's slow duration reduced from 1.5 to 1 second. Overall, Sett should still dominate his winning matchups because his damage wasn't hit at all. However, in ones that are close to even or even losing, Sett is in now a much more volatile place than before. While Sett did have a ton of counterplay in terms of gameplay, it felt like there wasn't much you could do about him during the laning phase. These nerfs should open up some options for players to counter Sett harder during champion select. Alright guys, now next up into the jungle. First up, let's talk about Rammus. Well, it was fun while it lasted. Rammus's base attack speed is getting a nerf from 0.656 to 0.625. Essentially, he's having it reverted back to where it was last patch. He saw his win rate shoot up significantly because of this buff alongside buffs to Cinderhulk. Maybe giving two buffs at once was just a little bit too much, so Riot are taking some of that power away from Rammus next patch. Same thing is happening with Amumu. They gave his ultimate the ability to stop enemies while dashing, while simultaneously buffing its cooldown. Next patch, the cooldown is going to be reverted from 130 to 100 seconds to 150 to 100 seconds. He'll still be in a much better place than he was originally last patch because he's keeping those other quality of life buffs on his Q and ultimate. Although he's still a weak early game jungler, those buffs to Cinderhulk have been helping him out a ton, and this nerf is quite justified as he's been seeing a lot of success. Kayn is receiving a couple of minor buffs as well. The more straightforward one is that his W will now slow for 70% instead of 60%. Although small, it's still a buff. A more complex but significant one he's receiving is that his orb spawn rate will now be changed. While it used to increase at the 0 minute, 8 minute, and 12 minute mark, the growth will now be smooth. Overall, this should increase the amount of orbs he attains by about 3%. This should mean that there'll be less of those scenarios where he's literally one orb away from transforming. It's a subtle yet effective buff that gives Kayn some more functionality. Graves is also receiving some buffs. His magic resist is being increased from 30 plus 1 per level to 32 plus 1.25 per level. His Q's mana cost will now cost a flat 60 mana instead of increasing by 5 each level, and its cooldown is being reduced by a second at all ranks. As a result, Graves will do better in every single game, but especially when he's against champions that deal magic damage. Those extra points of magic resist help a lot, as it'll help mitigate the damage boost mages gain after purchasing Sorcerer's Shoes. Finally, let's follow up on those unconventional junglers. We'll speed through these and mention our thoughts about them shortly after. Darius's passive damage to monsters is being increased from 125% to 175%. Mordekaiser is seeing his passive's max damage to monsters increase from 25 to 120 to 28 to 164. Poppy's Q's max damage to non-champions is being increased from 40 to 120 to 50 to 160. While there have been no changes set yet, Brand is expected to receive some changes on patch 10.6 to introduce him into the jungle. Oh gosh, that's gonna be scary. Overall, Darius and Mordekaiser have been underperforming in the jungle, and Riot is continuing to expand the jungle pool, throwing in Poppy and Brand as well. While Poppy might end up working out pretty decently, these buffs to Darius and Mordekaiser only continue to help them out as solo laners as well, when they want to either farm their own jungle camps or counter jungle enemies. We'll have to wait and see though, perhaps with the right meta shifts, these two will end up becoming powerful junglers as well. Alright guys, let's head into the mid lane next. First up, Lissandra is having her Q-AP ratio increase from 0.7 to 0.8. It's a pretty minor one, and Lissandra's statistics should remain relatively the same. If you're a Lissandra player yourself, well then a buff is still a buff at the very least. Lissandra will still need some more buffs if she wants to hold a place in the meta again, however. Neeko's attack speed per level is being increased from 3% to 3.5%, while her attack speed ratio is being increased from 0.645 to 0.6875. Her W's magic damage is being increased from 50 to 130 to 50 to 150, and her E's AP ratio increased from 0.4 to 0.6. And her R's shield is being increased from 50 to 110 plus 0.5 AP to 75 to 125 plus 0.75 AP. These many buffs will push Neeko into a much better place than before. Both AP and AD Neeko will benefit heavily from the attack speed and W buffs, while the shield buffs are a nice addition for those times when Neeko does manage to successfully land a sick ultimate. It's likely that you'll also see a lot more competitive play as a result of these buffs. Twisted Fate's AP ratio on his blue card is being increased from 0.5 to 0.9, while his red card's AP ratio is being increased from 0.5 to 0.7. I really like the concept of this buff. Twisted Fate is already in a good spot, so expect him to become a strong or slightly OP pick next patch. His wave clear will be much stronger as a result of the buff to red card specifically. There isn't ever really a good reason to pick any card that's not gold in the later stages of the game, and this should incentivize more thoughtful gameplay out of Twisted Fate players. My personal pick for this patch is going to be Twisted Fate. I think he'll dominate solo queue with his new buff. Next up, let's talk about bot laners. Sivir is having her Q and R buff next patch. Her Q will now deal 35 to 95 base damage instead of 35 to 115 damage. However, its AD ratio is being heavily buffed, now dealing 70 to 130% total AD instead of 70 to 110% total AD. Her early game remains untouched, but her Q will pack a much heavier punch in the later stages of the game. Her R's minimum movement speed bonus is being increased from 20% flat to 20, 25, 30% based on spell level. These are small buffs, but they definitely help a lot since Sivir is a utility marksman regardless. With some more movement speed on her ultimate, her teammates will be able to maneuver even more effectively during team fights. Kai'Sa is having her numbers shifted around a lot as well, but at the end of the day, she should end up stronger than before. Her Q's AP ratio is being decreased from 0.4 to 0.25, but will now fire 12 instead of 10 missiles once upgraded. Her W's damage is being changed from 20 to 120 plus 0.6 AP and 1.5 total AD to 30 to 130 plus 0.7 AP and 1.3 total AD. The damage is going to be buffed in some situations and nerfed in others, but its cooldown refund while upgraded is going to go up from 50% to 70%. Overall, these changes should make Kai'Sa a little bit stronger than before, especially as players begin to optimize her builds around them. Kai'Sa has been underperforming recently, and these buffs were much needed to stabilize her win rate. Next up, let's talk about the supports. Blitzcrank has been too powerful in solo queue. He has way too much agency over games and is getting a nerf to shut him down. His armor is being reduced from 40 to 37. Wow, he's going to get gutted. Come on, Riot, this nerf should do very little to Blitzcrank obviously, because if 3 armor matters that much to you personally, you could just add another armor stat rune there during champion select. Overall, Blitzcrank players will get punished a little harder for their mistakes, but we won't see any major changes to his win rate. His real value comes from his Q. Bard has been dominating solo queue for a couple of patches now, but Riot is also being conservative about their nerfs towards him as well. His passive damage per 5 chimes is being decreased from 15 to 12. This should leave his power in lane intact for the most part, but he'll deal less damage later into the game. With the emergence of his Dead Man's Plate rapid fire cannon build, it makes sense. Bard has been dealing a lot more damage than before because of this new build, so this small nerf should help bring him back to where he once was. He'll still remain as a powerful pick, but expect him to one-shot enemies a lot less. So support Sona got hit too hard by those last nerfs. She's having them reverted next patch. In other words, her base AD is being increased from 45 plus 2 per level to 49 plus 3 per level, and her E will provide a flat 20% self-movement speed buff. Unfortunately, this means that she'll also find some more power back in the top lane again. But we'll just have to wait and see how things pan out. Sona has been underperforming heavily, and she was in dire need of buffs like these. You can expect her to become a mid or high tier pick once again, as she's basically having the reset button pushed for her. Another support in need of some buffs is going to be someone we haven't talked about in a while, Alistar. He just hasn't been cutting it, so he's going to have his base health increase from 575 to 600. Also, his passive will now collect charges at all times, rather than only when it's off cooldown. This buff to his passive is a big buff. It'll help him and his ally stay stronger in lane. Remember that Alistar's passive heals his ally for double, so he'll be able to keep them healthy enough to continue fighting. This is one of those buffs that's a lot stronger than it looks. Having to wait for his passive before collecting charges delays it even more than its static cooldown intends for it. Especially early on in the game, this can matter a lot. Expect some more moves out of your favorite bull, as he's definitely going to get a lot stronger next patch. Now that we've covered the champion changes, let's talk about some items and turrets to wrap it all up. First up, Titanic Hydra is having both its passive damage buffed. Its passive damage is going up from 5 plus 1% of your max HP to 5 plus 1.5% of your max HP. On secondary targets, this number is going from 40 plus 2.5% of your max HP to 40 plus 3% of your max HP. Overall, this should help out Juggernaut and Bruiser classes as a whole. 0.5% ends up being about 15 damage in the very late stages of the game, so depending on how many basic attacks you're getting off during team fights, this buff can actually add up. Ravenous Hydra is also set to receive a significant buff. Its lifesteal is being increased from 12% to 18%, while its active radius is increasing from 400 to 450. Champions who already like to build this item like Fiora and Camille are going to love this buff. The 6% extra lifesteal adds up to about an extra 225 gold worth of stats, making it a much more valuable purchase than before. Since dealing damage also allows you to heal off the AoE damage you deal with it, you'll be able to heal a lot more off of each wave you clear. Alongside the Titanic Hydra buffs, this should help out bruisers and junglers a lot. Speaking of the devil, Blade of the Ruined King is also receiving a huge buff for melee champions. Melee champions will deal 12% instead of 8% of their target's current health as bonus damage. This has been more of a tank busting item in the past, and a lot of bruisers and divers were discouraged from building this item when they had so many better alternatives. I expect champions like Jace, Irelia, and Zed to be able to utilize this item extremely effectively once these buffs go through. Spellthief's Edge and Spectral Sickle are also receiving a nerf. You'll only be able to activate their effects with an ally nearby. This should hard nerf some funneling strategies and force solo laners to actually farm. This is actually a healthy change, and I'm really glad that they're doing this. Boots of Mobility is also having its cost increase from 900 to 1000. These boots have been extremely strong, especially in higher levels of play. Since this is an item players usually buy very early on, adding 100 gold to its cost makes a big difference. You'll now need to invest more if you want to utilize them. Boots of Swiftness have always been outshone by other shoes, thus its bonus movement speed is being increased from 55 to 60. Hopefully this incentivizes more players to utilize them. Finally, turrets are receiving some balance changes as well. Gold per turret plating taken is being increased from 120 to 160. Also, ranged champions will also deal 80% damage to them now, and the amount of resistances turrets gain from Bulwark is being increased from 35 to 45. Bulwark adds extra resistances for every nearby enemy champion, so this should make those Fiestas down in the bottom lane much less effective than before. In other words, it's going to be much harder to take reinforced turrets off of a single push than it was before. Overall, this is a nerf to many mid laners and bot laners, and is intended to equalize the playing field for all lanes. As a top laner, I'm pretty excited for these changes. That's it for the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Once again, if you want to get better at League of Legends this season, make sure to click the description link below and go to ProGuides.com. And if you guys want to see more content like this, then leave us a like and consider subscribing to the channel for more. That's it for the video. Thank you so much for watching. Good luck in your next few games, and I'll see you on the Rift.